The first time Marisol was told to use the service entrance, she smiled so she wouldn't cry. It was her first day. She'd worn her mother's pressed white blouse, flats she couldn't afford, and lipstick the color of a sunset over Oaxaca. She'd come to work on time, eager and proud, knowing how hard she had studied to get here. A hospitality associate at one of the most prestigious hotels in San Diego. But when she arrived at the front, the valet looked her up and down like she was lost. "You're here to clean? Service entrance is around back, down the hill." She hesitated. "Actually, I was told to ask for Ms. Carruthers. I'm starting at the front desk." He blinked. "Oh, I just thought—" "Never mind. Go on in." She thanked him politely. But something in his voice, in the way he said thought, stuck to her like mildew in linens. Inside, she stepped into chilled air and polished marble. The lobby smelled like eucalyptus and old money. Two blonde women at the concierge desk exchanged glances as she approached. "You here for linens?" one of them asked, not unkindly, just carelessly. "Housekeeping's that way." "No," Marisol said, placing her palms on the counter to steady herself. "I'm Marisol Delgado, the new hospitality assistant." The pause that followed was long enough to hear the soft clink of glasses in the bar. She had been through worse. God, yes. She had worked double shifts as a hotel housekeeper through college, cleaned toilets in gas stations between community college night classes, translated lease agreements for neighbors whose English wasn't good enough to fight their landlords. She had made it through every insult by reminding herself, "You belong where you make yourself belong," but this place had a smile that bit. By her second week, she understood the silent rules. She was the only one with an accent at the desk, the only one who wasn't offered a blazer for the chilly air, the only one asked to handle the Spanish calls. And every morning the general manager, Mr. Eaton, greeted the others with a cheerful, "Morning, ladies," before nodding at her with a clipped "Morning in Maria." It was Marisol. She corrected him. Once he didn't apologize, just said, "Same difference." She laughed later that night bitterly, on the phone with her best friend, Lucia. "They think I'm the coffee girl, or the nanny." One guest tried to hand me their car keys. Lucia chuckled. "They're lucky you're not handing them a lawsuit." "No point," Marisol said. "I just have to wait." "Wait for what?" Marisol stared out her apartment window, eyes on the blinking light of a plane overhead. Her voice was soft but certain. "For the door they don't see coming." What no one at the Pacific Crest Resort knew was that Marisol had already completed her MBA, part-time, online, in Spanish and English. What they didn't know was that her uncle in Tijuana had just sold a string of properties and asked her to help invest. And what they couldn't have guessed, not from the way she nodded politely and stayed late to restock brochures, was that she had already begun searching for hospitality properties going into foreclosure. She saw every ugly glance as a down payment, every slight as a receipt. She logged hours, built contacts, answered calls with grace. And when guests made ignorant remarks, "You speak English so well," or "Did your people build this?" she smiled, logged the comment in a private folder titled Fuel and carried on. Because Marisol Delgado wasn't just working the front desk. She was watching, calculating, learning exactly how the hotel, Sarissa, and where it was starting to crack. And one night, as she passed by the executive office, she heard the tail end of a hushed phone call. Mr. Eaton, frustrated. "Yes, I know the numbers look bad. No, we can't cut more staff. If we don't find a buyer by Q3, we're underwater." Marisol kept walking, but that night she opened a new folder on her desktop. It was titled Pacific Crest Acquisition Plan. By early spring, Marisol had learned every creak in the Pacific Crest's marble floor, every quirk of the elevators, every unspoken rule of who got coffee poured first in the morning meetings. She had memorized the way Eaton's smile disappeared when donors weren't in the room, the way Carruthers' voice turned syrupy with VIP guests and steel hard with everyone else. But she had also learned more important things. Which vendors overcharged for linen service, which weeks the occupancy dipped and why, which regulars tipped cash and which just winked. She had become fluent in their arrogance and fluent in their blind spots. And at night, while her co-workers went home to Netflix and wine, Marisol logged into her second life. She combed financial filings, researched hotel valuations, and studied how small, struggling properties flipped hands without much noise. On weekends, she drove down to Tijuana to sit with her Uncle Victor and translate contracts over coffee and tamales. He'd been the one to seed the idea, really. "So you're the smartest one in the family," he said one day, tapping his tablet with a thick, calloused finger. "We have money sitting. You tell me where to put it. Not stock. Something real. Something we can touch." She sipped her café con leche and thought of the marble floors. By April, she had narrowed it to 3 properties. One was too far inland. One was riddled with bad reviews and lawsuits. But the third was interesting. It was smaller than Pacific Crest, a boutique hotel near downtown San Diego. Once charming, now dated. Its owner, a second-generation Greek-American widow, had kept the place afloat mostly out of pride. But her health was declining, and she was willing to sell quietly to someone respectful. Someone local. "I don't want it turned into condos," the woman said, clutching Marisol's hand on their second visit. "Promise me it won't be just another soulless chain." "I promise," Marisol said. And she meant it. She didn't want a hollow empire. She wanted dignity. Back at the Pacific Crest, whispers started to float through the hallways. The general manager's door stayed closed more often. There were rumors of budget cuts. One of the bellhops found a third-party consultant wandering around the pool deck, taking photos and notes. And Ms. Carruthers, always polished, always poised, had started wearing flat shoes, like she was bracing for something. Marisol didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her work remained impeccable. She smiled, thanked guests in 5 languages, and stocked towels with military precision. But she also began keeping records. When she stayed late, she noted who else clocked out early. When the system glitched, she made backups. When a guest requested early check-in, she saw who turned them away, and who welcomed them with grace. She was building something, a case, a plan, a proof of worth that no one else knew existed. And quietly, without alerting a soul, she reached out to the brokerage firm handling Pacific Crest's potential buyers. Not as an employee, as an investor. "Marisol Delgado," she said on the call, her voice crisp as glass. "I'm interested in learning more about the pending sale of the Pacific Crest Resort. Can we schedule a time to review the books?" There was a pause on the other end. "You both work there, don't you?" "I do," she said, "and I'm looking to buy." That Friday at the hotel's monthly staff mixer, Marisol poured punch into plastic cups and listened as Ms. Carruthers complained softly to the assistant manager about the lack of leadership diversity initiatives. Marisol turned away before they could hand her the trash bag. She walked out to the deck where the ocean was smudging into a twilight horizon. Somewhere down the boardwalk, music was playing, soft, pulsing, Latin rhythms with a saxophone threading through, and she smiled, not the small, careful smile she wore at the front desk, but the smile of someone who knew how the story was going to end, even if they couldn't see it yet. Because Marisol Delgado, the ethnic girl they pushed to the shadows, was about to stand in the center of the room they never thought she'd enter. She just had a few more pieces to move first. The offer wasn't loud. It was typed in the neat, sterile language of acquisition. Marisol had waited 3 more weeks before submitting the letter of intent. Her name wasn't on it, not directly, She used the LLC she'd set up with her. Uncle in Mexico, Delgado Capital Holdings, with a San Diego-based attorney listed as the point of contact. By the time Eaton received the formal offer from the brokerage firm, he never thought to connect it to the woman still placing welcome mints on pillows and answering calls in 2 languages. To him it was just another name in a stack of interested buyers, except this one came with clean funding, no debt, no contingencies, and a promise to retain the current staff for 6 months, a kindness he hadn't offered others. Back at the front desk, Marisol watched it unfold like a chess game she'd already played out in her mind. The executives grew quieter. The back-office printer ran hot late into the evenings. Carruthers looked rattled during team huddles, her notes uncharacteristically smudged. And Mr. Eaton, once the swaggering voice of authority, now walked with a stiff jaw and distant eyes. Then came the announcement. All staff, read the email, are invited to attend a mandatory meeting next Tuesday regarding hotel ownership transition. Marisol read it once, then again. Then she closed the laptop, slid her notepad into her purse and clocked out without a word. She walked down the boardwalk that night, her coat too thin for the sea wind, but her spirit on fire. She passed by small hotels glowing warm in the dusk, little spots with history in their bones, and she wondered if the Pacific Crest had ever truly belonged to someone who loved it. Someone who saw its guests not as wallets, but as travelers deserving comfort and care. She would be the first. On Monday, she stopped by her uncle's office in Tijuana with a folder tucked beneath her arm. Victor Delgado, silver-haired, ex-military diabetic and wildly proud, poured her a cup of strong coffee and looked over the papers. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, flipping through the pages. "They'll know soon." "They won't know until they sign." He raised an eyebrow. "You want them to sign first, then learn they've been working for you all along?" "I want them to feel what I felt," she said softly. "To look someone in the eye and realize they never saw them." He didn't argue. He just slid the signed authorization across the table and kissed her forehead. "You're your mother's daughter," he said, "but smarter, and you speak more English than she ever dreamed." Marisol smiled. "I speak their English. That's different." Tuesday arrived. The staff filed into the Coral Room, a windowless conference space with low ceilings and stale coffee. Eaton stood stiffly at the front with Carruthers, flanked by 2 grey-suited reps from the brokerage firm. "Today," Eaton began, voice brittle, "we formally announce that the Pacific Crest Resort has been acquired. Effective immediately, ownership will transition to a private firm. All current roles remain intact until further notice." Murmurs buzzed across the room. Carruthers scanned the crowd, her eyes lingering on Marisol for half a second before moving on. One of the grey suits stepped forward. "The acquiring company, Delgado Capital Holdings, has requested a brief meet and greet with select staff later this week. We will notify you individually. Please continue all operations as normal." Someone raised a hand. "Who are they? Are they corporate? International?" "They're private," Eaton said quickly. "You'll be given more context in the next few weeks." Marisol kept her expression neutral, not smiling, not smug, just composed, because poetic justice wasn't about shouting. It was about letting the silence stretch long enough for truth to echo. And when Carruthers passed her in the hallway an hour later, Marisol didn't flinch as the woman offered a brittle half-smile and said, "Strange name for a company, isn't it? Delgado Capital. Sounds foreign." Marisol met her gaze, steady and unmoved. "Does it?" Carruthers blinked, thrown. "I suppose we'll see how long they last." "Oh," Marisol said, her voice smooth. "I think they'll be here a while." That night, Marisol sat in her tiny studio apartment, surrounded by silence and stacks of legal pads, spreadsheets, old menus, and maps of the hotel layout. She held the staff roster in her hand and began highlighting names, not for replacement, for promotion, because this takeover wasn't revenge, it was restoration. But first they needed to see her, really see her, and that part was coming soon. Thursday came with a coastal fog that rolled in from the Pacific like a whisper, soft but full of tension. Marisol had barely slept the night before, not from nerves, but from preparation. She'd reviewed every name on the Pacific, Crest payroll. She'd studied shift patterns, watched body language in the break room, and memorized the hierarchy that operated even outside official titles. She knew who pulled extra weight and who took credit, who stayed behind to help guests past their checkout times, who left the floor dirty, knowing housekeeping would take the blame. And now she was ready. At 10 a.m., a curated group of staff were called up, one by one, to the smaller conference room near the executive wing. There they were told they'd be meeting a representative of the new ownership group. The door opened. Marisol stood at the window, arms crossed, in a navy blazer they'd never seen her wear before. For a moment, no one said a word. Then someone finally stammered, "Wait, Marisol?" She turned, calm, collected. "Good morning," she said, as if this were just another guest check-in. "Thank you for coming." Carruthers, who had arrived late and clearly unprepared, burst out with a nervous laugh. There. Must be a mistake. Miss Delgado works at the front desk." A pause followed, the kind that holds its breath. One of the legal reps from Delgado Capital stepped in. "No mistake. Miss Delgado is the principal partner and incoming managing director of this property." It was like dropping a single match into a room soaked with denial. Carruthers blinked, trying to find a lifeline in Eaton's stone face. Marisol walked forward, that same steady grace she'd practiced for years carrying her across the room. "For those who don't know," she said, voice quiet but unshakable, "I started here 2 years ago. I've watched this hotel run from the ground up. I've answered phones, handled guest complaints, filled in when leadership was out of office, and heard every whisper about who does and doesn't belong." She looked at each person slowly, letting it sink in. "I belong." Then she turned, her eyes to Carruthers, "And starting Monday I'll be reviewing all staff performance evaluations personally, including leadership conduct." Carruthers opened her mouth, closed it. The room had shifted. Eaton remained silent, his jaw working like he was grinding stone between his molars. Marisol wasn't cruel, but she was deliberate. "There will be no immediate firings," she said, "not unless someone chooses to disrespect this transition. But be advised, we are restructuring, we are elevating, and we are finally treating this hotel not as a brand but as a home." There was a long, loaded silence, and then, "Marisol?" one of the housekeeping managers asked gently, voice cracking with emotion. "Does this mean you're our boss now?" She looked at her. An older black woman named Grace, who had once brought Marisol soup during a 13-hour shift. "No," Marisol said softly. "It means we run it now. Together." Later that afternoon, she walked the halls, not as an employee but as the owner. Guests still smiled at her the same way. But staff looked up differently now. Not everyone. Some kept their heads down, unwilling to acknowledge what had shifted. But a few stopped her, shook her hand. "Didn't know we had a Delgado owning the place. You're the reason I stayed." "This long?" "About damn time." She passed the valet who once sent her to the service entrance. He looked down when their eyes met. She gave him a polite nod. No malice, no gloating. She wasn't here to humiliate anyone, just to show them what it looked like when the doors they closed got reopened by the person they overlooked. That night, she returned to her apartment one last time. It was still small, still smelled faintly of dish soap and lavender, but she walked through the space slowly, letting it go in her mind. She no longer needed to measure her value in square footage or borrowed furniture. She was moving into the owner's suite next week, the one with the view of the water, not because she needed luxury, but because she had earned every inch of it. Monday morning broke like a reset button. The Pacific Crest was the same on the outside, its pristine white facade glowing against the sea, the valet joggers in crisp uniforms, the sound of gulls sweeping over the parking circle. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time in years, the staff room was full 10 minutes early. People stood, quietly sipping coffee, side-glancing at one another. Rumors had already swirled all weekend. Marisol Delgado wasn't just the face at the front desk anymore. She was the face now. The ownership papers had been filed, public notices served, and for the first time since its grand opening in the 90s, the Pacific Crest was no longer in the hands of the Eaton family. It belonged to someone who had once wiped down its lobby chairs after midnight. Marisol arrived just before 9. She wore grey slacks, a fitted cream blazer, and a badge that said nothing more than Marisol Delgado, Managing Director. She passed reception, where a younger hire was already seated, smiling nervously, and nodded in encouragement. Then she stepped into the coral room where the leadership meeting was set. Eaton was already there, stiff and sour in his usual navy suit. Carruthers sat beside him, lips pinched into a smile too polite to be real. Across from them sat Grace from housekeeping, Juno from maintenance, and Ellie from food services. 3 names Marisol had personally chosen to elevate for this week's open forums. "Let's begin," Marisol said, setting down her folder and taking the central seat. Her voice was smooth but clipped. She had no time for old power games. This week marks a transitional phase. As of this morning, all department heads will report to a shared leadership council. I'll chair it, but decisions will be collaborative. I believe in horizontal power, not ladders that keep the same people at the top. Carruthers let out a soft scoff before catching herself. Eaton just frowned. "I know some of you are used to different systems," Marisol continued, "but that system didn't serve the staff or the guests very well. It served ego and profit, barely." She passed out sheets. "This is our new reporting model. All department evaluations will be cross-checked with internal feedback. There will be no anonymous retaliation. Every voice counts." Eaton finally broke his silence. "And what's my role in this new model?" Marisol didn't look up immediately. She took a deliberate breath. "Your contract ended with the sale. As per the clause you signed, you're welcome to apply for any new roles should you choose to stay." A silence dropped like granite. "You're dismissing me?" he asked, more stunned than angry. "I'm releasing you," she said. "This is a fresh start. I'm sure you'll land on your feet." Carruthers looked between them, panicked. "And me?" Marisol turned her gaze, calm and unwavering. "I've reviewed your evaluations, Ms. Carruthers. You may remain on staff as a concierge representative, but leadership is no longer a match." That afternoon, the news buzzed through the building like electricity. Eaton's out? Carruthers got demoted. Did she really make Grace head of housekeeping? Ops! She had Grace, with her thick glasses and calloused hands, who had once mopped up vomit without complaint, while Carruthers ordered lunch upstairs, and not just her. Juno, who fixed plumbing with a back injury and never once asked for credit, was now responsible for building-wide energy efficiency initiatives. Ellie, who had turned 2-star breakfast reviews into 5-star raves using just better sourcing, now had full control of the dining budget. Marisol walked the halls, met guests, took notes and listened, not as a figurehead, as the woman who knew where the cracks were, because she had once been told to clean them. That night in the staff room a small celebration formed. Nothing formal, just paper plates, empanadas someone's cousin had dropped off, and a speaker playing soft mariachi near the lockers. Grace pulled Marisol aside. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, smiling through watery eyes. "Most people climb up and forget the floor they stood on." Marisol looked around at the laughter, the warmth, the new feeling blooming through the old walls. "I didn't forget," she said quietly. "I never left." Later she returned to her office, a space Eton once occupied, now stripped of leather chairs and heavy paintings. It was simpler now. Light wood, plants. A window open to the sound of waves. She sat, alone, pulled open her drawer, and unfolded a worn sheet of paper, her first Pacific Crest paycheck. $11.75 an hour. She smoothed it across the desk like a relic, a receipt, a promise fulfilled. She didn't need applause. She had the keys. A week after the reshuffle, Pacific Crest felt like a different place, not because the marble floors had changed, but because the people walking on them did. There was laughter behind the front desk now, a real greeting, not the trained, tight-lipped smile. Guests noticed. Reviews started trickling in on TripAdvisor. Felt like I was treated like family, not a wallet. Finally, Spanish-speaking staff who care. Marisol D runs a tight ship, and you can feel the pride in every corner. But not everyone was happy. The old guard, those who once ran the place like a private country club, had begun organizing whispered lunches outside the hotel. Disgruntled managers who weren't offered renewed contracts, local vendors who'd overcharged for years and were now being quietly replaced by ethical ones, and a few VIPs who used to get comped bottles for doing nothing but looking important, and in that circle sat Linda Eaton, widow of the original founder, mother of the now jobless Mr. Eaton. She hadn't called Marisol directly. She wouldn't, but Marisol had seen the email forwarded by her assistant. Subject: concern over recent changes. As a long-standing figure in the San Diego hospitality scene, I must express discomfort over the sudden pivot in management. Culture at the Pacific Crest Resort. We're hearing concerning things about inclusivity replacing legacy. Perhaps it's time for a board review. Marisol reread it twice, unmoved. Then she opened a new tab and began drafting a letter. Not a reply. An invitation. 3 days later, Linda Eaton stepped through the double glass doors she hadn't entered since the sale. She was dressed in cream and pearl, old money, clinging tightly to her posture. She looked around with narrowed eyes. The front desk staff greeted her in perfect English, perfect Spanish. A boy from Tijuana, Javier, offered to carry her purse. She declined, visibly irritated. Then, like clockwork, she asked, "Can you tell Ms. Delgado that Linda Eaton is here?" She emphasized Ms. Delgado like it was a mistake someone had made. "Of course," Javier said cheerfully. "She's expecting you." Marisol waited in the renovated boardroom. She had changed very little, only what needed changing. The over-polished cherry-wood table remained, but the portraits of Eaton family founders were now replaced with local photography. Sunset over the cliffs, a vendor on the beach selling elotes, a child blowing bubbles outside a taqueria. When Linda entered, she halted. Just slightly, Marisol stood to greet her. "Mrs. Eaton," she said, "thank you for accepting the invitation." "I was curious," Linda replied, glancing around. "I'm told you're changing everything." "Only—" "What needed changing?" Marisol said evenly. "Please sit." They did. For a moment neither spoke. The tension sat like stone between them. Then Linda cut to the point. "You've humiliated my son." Marisol kept her eyes steady. "Your son mismanaged people. He inherited power, not respect. I didn't humiliate him. I simply removed the protection that kept others from noticing. You think you're better than us now?" "No," Marisol said softly. "I think I worked harder." That landed like a slap in silk. Linda's jaw tensed, but she didn't stand. She wasn't used to being spoken to plainly. Certainly not by a woman she remembered once walking past in the lobby, with a mop in her hand. Marisol folded her hands on the table. This hotel doesn't belong to legacy. It belongs to people who build it, day by day, hour by hour. I'm not here to erase the Eaton name, it's in the foundation. But I'm here to make sure no one else is treated like they should use the back entrance. Linda's voice cracked then, cold and tight. You'll lose donors. The city elite won't like this. Marisol stood, slowly, with the same grace she used when delivering room keys years ago. Let me show you something. She led Linda down the hallway, past the suites toward the east wing. There, where Eaton once had his portrait above a fake fireplace, now stood a framed black and white photo. Staff members from decades past. Housekeepers, cooks, groundskeepers, smiling, arms around each other, names engraved beneath. A bronze plaque read, "To those who kept the doors open even when they were shut to them." Linda stared at it. Behind her, Marisol said quietly, "They never got a say, now they do." That evening, Marisol stood on the terrace. The sunset stretched gold over the Pacific, casting long shadows on the water. Grace joined her, sipping coffee. You really invited Linda Eaton to see the new place? I wanted her to feel it. Grace chuckled. She gonna donate? I don't need her money, Marisol said. Just her silence. They stood in peace, watching the light fall over the ocean, where old tides pulled away and new ones rolled in. It had been 2 months since Marisol took ownership of the Pacific Crest, and something extraordinary was beginning to happen, not just within the walls, but in the way people spoke about the place beyond them. The local paper had run a small column titled, "From Front Desk to the Top Floor," with a grainy headshot of Marisol smiling in a modest blouse outside the hotel. The article wasn't flashy, but it was sincere. It talked about her background, her education, her vision for hospitality rooted in respect, not hierarchy. The next day, 24 applications came in for positions that hadn't even been listed. Young people from immigrant families, older, workers who had once been passed over for looking tired, retirees looking to return part-time, not because they needed to, but because they believed in what she was doing. And still, Marisol kept her head down. Success didn't mean retreating. Behind a mahogany desk, it meant walking the floors, talking to guests, refilling the ice machine when no one else noticed it was low. She'd spent years learning every square inch of the building. Now she was listening to what it wanted to become. One afternoon, she took the maintenance elevator up to the old storage floor. It was technically unused, but she'd noticed some odd electrical charges in last month's billings, enough to suggest something was plugged in up there. She opened the old double doors. Dust swirled, and there, tucked behind old conference chairs and faded banners, was a room, locked. She called Juno. 10 minutes later, they popped it open. Inside was a forgotten suite, room 1423, a penthouse-style corner unit that had been sealed, off during renovations years ago, and never re-added to the booking system. But it wasn't empty. The furniture was vintage but elegant. A baby grand piano sat in the corner, covered in a silk sheet. On the dresser sat a crystal tray with faded chocolate still wrapped, and on the wall, a painting of a woman with deep brown skin in a navy uniform. No nameplate, no plaque. But her eyes looked out from the canvas like she had built the very bones of the place. Juno stepped forward. I think she was the first head of guest services, back in the 80s. I remember a vendor saying she used to run the floor before. Eaton's dad took over. Why was she erased? Marisol whispered. Same reason a lot of folks were, Juno said. Wrong time, wrong skin, right mind. Marisol stood still for a long while. Then she pulled out her phone. The next day, she called a local historian, commissioned a new nameplate, and ordered a small brass key holder to be installed outside. Room 1423. It would not be sealed again. The staff gathered as she gave a small speech. We don't erase people here. Not anymore. This room will be restored and booked only upon request for those who understand the value of legacy. She paused, hands folded over the velvet key. And starting next month, it will house the first of our scholarship guests, young women of color training in hospitality, leadership and service. Their tuition, lodging and mentorship will be covered by the Delgado Fellowship, Grace cried. Juno blinked fast. Carruthers didn't show up. Marisol didn't mind. That evening, she sat in the old suite alone, hands brushing the edge of the piano keys, soft notes echoing into the empty air. She didn't need applause. She didn't want fame. She wanted restoration. She wanted every guest who walked through the Pacific Crest to know that the story behind the walls was just as important as the view outside them, and that the girl once told to use the service entrance had opened a door they never knew was locked. 1 year later, the Pacific Crest looked the same from the street. Tourists still took selfies in front of the arched glass entryway. Palm trees still bowed in the breeze. Bellhops still snapped open umbrellas when the California rain came without warning. But the soul of the hotel had changed. It hummed now, not with elitism, but with energy. The kind of energy that came from being seen. Marisol stood in the lobby wearing a charcoal-grey dress and simple earrings her mother left behind. Her heels clicked quietly against the floor she used to polish on her knees. The annual Founders Gala was that evening, except this time it had a new name, the Keeper's Tribute, and this year's honorees were the people who had gone, unnoticed for decades. The second-shift housekeeper who worked through her chemo, the dishwasher who learned 5 languages by listening to servers speak in the kitchen, and a former valet, now a guest, who had started his own rideshare company. The ballroom shimmered with candles and pride. But Marisol didn't enter yet. She walked the hotel slowly, alone, floor by floor. She paused to smile at Juno, fixing a lock near the vending machines. Grace was fluffing pillows in the bridal suite, humming something warm and familiar. Outside room 1423, the brass plaque had been polished to a soft gleam, in honor of Rosa, Armine's first keeper of comfort. May every guest know her care. Inside, a soft light was on. One of the Delgado Fellows had arrived early, a first-generation college student from Chicago, suitcase still upright, already taking notes. On the welcome binder. Marisol smiled through the doorframe and let her be. Let her begin. Later at the gala, Carruthers approached in a plain black dress, no longer part of the inner circle, but still on payroll. She cleared her throat. I was wrong, she said. About you, about a lot. Marisol didn't smile, but she didn't turn away. We were all raised in someone's hallway, she said. Some of us had to build the door. Carruthers nodded and faded back into the crowd. Not everyone gets redemption. But sometimes silence is a kind of respect. When Marisol took the stage, she paused for a long moment, eyes sweeping over the staff, the new interns, the guests who didn't just look wealthy, but grateful. She held the mic softly like it might crack. I used to think this hotel was owned by people with money, but it was always held together by people with dignity. Tonight, we don't celebrate legacy, we celebrate labor and love. The room rose to its feet. Some clapped, some cried, most simply stood in awe. Because there she was, the girl who once sorted brochures and scrubbed bathroom tile, now the woman who owned the walls that once confined her, who didn't just open the door, she held it open. As the gala continued and laughter echoed under golden light, Marisol stepped outside alone for a moment of quiet. The sea breeze brushed her face. Somewhere in the distance, she could hear music from a wedding reception 2 blocks down. She watched a guest approach the hotel entrance. A young woman, nervous, underdressed, clutching a resume. The valet pointed toward the back. Marisol stepped forward quickly. She's with me, she said, Front entrance only. The girl looked up wide-eyed. Marisol smiled. You're right on time. And together they walked through the front doors, not as strangers, but as a continuation of every story that had come before.